Did you know that one of the most beloved movies ever made was considered a total failure when it first came out? It barely made any money in theaters. Almost nobody went to see it. And yet, today, millions of people call it the greatest film ever made. How does that happen? How does a movie go from forgotten to forever? Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the Shawshank Redemption. Number 20. The story came from a short book nobody expected before. There was a movie, there was a story. A quiet, powerful little story hidden inside a thick book of horror tales. Stephen King, yes, the same man who wrote terrifying stories about clowns and haunted hotels, wrote a gentle, emotional story called Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. It was published in 1982 inside a collection called Different Seasons. That collection had 4 stories, and most readers picked it up expecting scary nightmares. What they found instead was something completely different, something that made them cry instead of scream. The story of Andy Dufresne, a quiet banker wrongly sent to prison, didn't feel like Stephen King at all. It felt like something softer, something human. Himself has said many times that he is proud of that story in a very different way than he is proud of his scary work. It touched a different part of him, and it touched readers the same way. A filmmaker named Frank Darabont read that story. He felt something shift inside him. He knew he had to turn it into a movie. He had never directed a feature film before. He was still learning his craft, but he wrote a screenplay adaptation and sent it to Stephen King. King read it and was impressed. He sold the rights to Darabont for just $1. $1 single dollar. Not because the story had no value, but because Darabont's passion was obvious, and King wanted to give a young dreamer a chance. The $1 deal started everything. That tiny transaction between 2 storytellers launched one of the most emotionally powerful films in cinema history. King later said it was one of the best decisions he ever made. And Darabont never forgot the kindness. Sometimes the biggest things in life begin with almost nothing at all. What looked like a small handshake changed the entire world of movies. Number 19. Frank Darabont turned down $1 million to keep his dream. When Frank Darabont finished writing the screenplay, word spread quickly through Hollywood. Read the script and loved it. Big studios started calling. Big directors started circling. And one of the biggest names in Hollywood, Rob Reiner, the man behind When Harry Met Sally and Stand By Me, offered Darabont nearly $1 million to buy the script. $1 million. For a first-time director with no major films to his name, that was life-changing money. Darabont said no. He didn't want to sell the script. He wanted to direct it himself. He believed in Andy's story so deeply that he was willing to walk away from that enormous amount of money just to protect his vision. People around him thought he was making a terrible mistake. Some thought he was being foolish. $1 million is not a small thing to turn down, especially when you are young and still building your career. Darabont held on. He kept the script, found a way to get the movie made through Castle Rock Entertainment, a smaller production company willing to let him sit in the director's chair. And when the film finally came together, with Tim Robbins as Andy and Morgan Freeman as Red, it became exactly what Darabont had imagined. Something pure, something true to the story King had written. Reiner later admitted that he understood Darabont's choice. He had done something similar himself years before. Great directors know that some stories belong to the person who first believed in them. Darabont believed in Shawshank before anyone else did, and he protected it like something precious. What looked like stubbornness was actually pure love for a story. Number 18. Morgan Freeman was not the first choice for Red. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine anyone else playing Ellis Boyd, Red Redding. Morgan Freeman's warm, deep voice narrating Andy's story feels as natural as breathing. His calm eyes and gentle strength define the character in ways that seem impossible to separate from the film itself. But Freeman was not the first actor considered for the role. In Stephen King's original story, Red is actually described as a white Irishman. The nickname Red in the book refers to his red hair. Darabont began casting. He considered several different actors. Paul Newman was mentioned. Clint Eastwood was mentioned. Harrison Ford was even considered at one point. These were all massive stars at the time, powerful and respected. But Darabont kept coming back to Freeman. There was something about him that felt right in a way that couldn't be explained with words. Had appeared in Driving Miss Daisy and Glory and had proven he could carry deep emotional weight with quiet confidence. Darabont trusted that feeling. Freeman later said that the role of Red was one of the most meaningful of his career. He connected with the idea of a man who had spent so long behind walls that he had forgotten what freedom felt like. Freeman understood that kind of quiet sadness. He poured it into every line, every glance, every careful pause. To cast Freeman and to change Red's background completely showed that the spirit of a character matters far more than any physical description. Red became Red because of Morgan Freeman, and completely. That wasn't a casting decision. That was destiny walking through a door. Number 17. The prison was a real place, and it was falling apart. When the production team needed a prison that looked believable, they didn't build one from scratch. They found a real one. The Ohio State Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio, was a massive, crumbling old prison that had been closed in 1990. It was scheduled to be torn down. The walls were cracked. The pipes were broken. When the filmmakers walked through it, they saw something extraordinary. The architecture was Gothic and imposing. The long cell blocks stretched away like dark tunnels. The stone walls held decades of real human sadness. No film set could replicate that kind of atmosphere, already a character in itself. Getting permission to film there was complicated. The building was unsafe in many places. The crew had to reinforce floors and ceilings just to move cameras through certain corridors. Some areas were genuinely dangerous. Plaster fell from above during takes. Cold air poured through broken windows in the middle of summer shoots, which actually helped the actors feel colder and more uncomfortable. Exactly what the story required. The community of Mansfield eventually rallied around the film. They helped with logistics and extras. Some local residents appeared as background prisoners. The prison had been a painful part of the town's history, but through this movie, it became something else entirely. It became art. The Ohio State Reformatory still stands. It was saved from demolition partly because of the fame that Shawshank brought to it. The fans visit every single year to walk the halls Andy walked. The ruin became a landmark. What was almost destroyed became a monument to hope. Number 16. Tim Robbins had to stand in a sewer pipe full of real filth. One of the most iconic moments in the entire film is Andy Dufresne's escape. After years of secretly chiseling through a wall and crawling through a drainage pipe, Andy bursts out into the rain, arms spread wide, finally free. It is one of the most joyful images in movie history. But filming that scene was anything but joyful. The drainage pipe that Tim Robbins had to crawl through was 500 feet long. That is a very, very long tunnel. And inside that tunnel, built by the production crew, was a mixture of water and what the crew politely described as not-so-clean materials. The smell was described by everyone on set as absolutely awful. Robbins had to crawl through that pipe multiple times to get the shot right. The tunnel was narrow and dark. There was very little room to move. The mixture inside was cold. The walls pressed in from every side. Robbins, a tall man, had to squeeze and drag himself forward through the entire length of it, take after take. Between takes, he came out covered in the mixture, was cleaned off, and sent back in again. The moment he emerges, standing in the rain, throwing his head back in pure relief, it looks effortless. It looks like pure joy. Because it was. Whatever discomfort he suffered in that tunnel, the moment he stood in the rain and felt free, something real happened. Robbins later said the rain that night was absolutely freezing cold. The crew used real rain machines that pumped ice-cold water. His shivering was genuine. What looked like the most triumphant moment in cinema was actually one of the most physically miserable nights of filming. That wasn't acting. That was survival, turning into something beautiful. Number 15. The famous rock hammer. Scene took weeks to get right. Early in the film, Andy asks Red to smuggle a rock hammer into the prison for him. He says he wants it for a hobby, carving little figurines from rock. Red looks at the tiny hammer and says it would take a man about 600 years to tunnel out of prison with that. The joke gets a laugh. The moment is also deeply important. That rock hammer is the beginning of everything. The scene seems simple, but getting the right rock hammer, one that looked small enough to be funny but real enough to be believable, took the props department weeks of searching. They needed something that felt authentic, something a real geology enthusiast would actually own. The hammer also needed to fit inside a specific carved-out space inside a poster, which became important later in the story. The props team ended up creating a custom version of the hammer that was slightly smaller than a real one, but made of genuine metal with a real wooden handle. The weight had to feel right in Morgan Freeman's hands as he held it up and examined it. The scene had to communicate comedy and seriousness at the same time. Too heavy and it wouldn't be funny. Too light and it wouldn't feel real. What the audience never knew was that dozens of different versions were made and tested before the right one was chosen. The hammer that eventually appeared on screen was the result of careful thought and quiet craftsmanship. One small tool, one enormous story. It looked like nothing. It meant everything. Number 14. The poster that hid a secret and caused a real problem. If you have seen the film, you know that Andy hides the progress of his escape behind a series of movie posters. First Rita Hayworth, then Marilyn Monroe, and finally Raquel Welch. These posters covered the hole in his cell wall for years. The image of the poster hiding something dangerous behind it is one of the most memorable visuals in the whole movie. But getting the rights to use those real celebrity images on screen was not simple. The production team had to negotiate with estates and licensing agencies to use the likenesses of these famous women. Rita Hayworth's estate was particularly careful about how her image would be used, wanted to make sure she would be portrayed with respect. The filmmakers assured them that her image represented beauty, freedom, and hope, which was entirely true within the story. It was also a technical problem. The posters in the film needed to look perfectly smooth against the wall, as if they had been glued flat to hide what was behind them. But in reality, the wall behind the poster had been cut away for the camera. Getting the poster to hang correctly while concealing a real opening in the wall required very precise engineering from the set construction team. Final shot, when the warden tears the poster away and reveals the hole, had to be filmed in a single take because the poster could not be easily replaced. Everything had to be perfect the first time. The camera was ready, the actors were ready, the poster was torn, and behind it, the secret that had been hiding for years. Number 13. The rooftop beer scene was almost cut from the film. About halfway through the movie, Andy and a group of prisoners are chosen to help tar a prison rooftop. Andy overhears a guard talking about a tax problem and offers financial advice in exchange for cold beers for his crew. It ends with Red and the others sitting quietly in the warm sun, sipping cold beer, while Andy watches them with a small, satisfied smile. One of the most peaceful and human moments in the entire film. Many viewers consider it one of their favorite scenes, but it almost didn't make it into the final cut. The production team debated whether the scene slowed down the pace. The film was already long. There were tough choices being made about what to keep and what to remove. Some people in the editing room felt the rooftop scene was indulgent, too slow, too quiet, too small for a prison drama. Darabont fought hard to keep it. He argued that the scene was not slow. It was essential, that even inside a place designed to strip away humanity, a moment of simple pleasure could still exist. 3 cold beers on a rooftop. Sunlight. A brief pause from everything terrible. That was the entire point of the movie in miniature. The scene stayed. And Morgan Freeman's narration over that sequence, describing how for just a short while they felt like free men, became one of the most quoted passages in cinema history. The scene that almost disappeared became the scene people remember most. What looked unnecessary turned out to be the whole heart of the story. Number 12. The music scene. Mozart was completely unscripted in tone. There is a moment in Shawshank that almost defies description. Andy locks himself inside the warden's office, finds a record of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro, and broadcasts it over the prison loudspeaker. Every prisoner in the yard stops. They look up, they listen, some close their eyes. Music pours over them like water. The scene is in the script. But the emotional power of it, the specific way the camera lingered on each prisoner's face, the way the music was allowed to play without interruption for an extraordinary length of time, that came from instinct on the day of filming. When the extras heard the music playing through the speakers, many of them were genuinely moved. Some of them had never heard classical opera before. The combination of being outdoors, in a prison yard, surrounded by stone walls with this soaring, beautiful music coming from above, it created something that no one had quite planned. Darabont saw it happening and told his camera operators to keep rolling, keep watching faces, keep capturing what was real. The voice singing in that moment belongs to Etta Moser, a German soprano performing the duet Sullaria from Mozart's opera. Her voice lifts and spirals into something that feels impossible. Impossible that such beauty could exist in such a place. That was exactly the point Andy was making by pressing play. Morgan Freeman's narration in that scene says that the music reached deep inside every man in that yard and touched something they couldn't name. The truth was, it happened for real. Number 11. The film flopped at the box office, then became immortal. The Shawshank Redemption was released in theaters in September of 1994. Reviews were mostly positive. Critics admired the performances and the storytelling, but audiences did not come. The film earned just $16 million in its entire theatrical run against a production budget of around $25 million. By Hollywood standards, it was a quiet disaster. The studio pulled it from wide release fairly quickly. It seemed like the movie would simply disappear. Another forgotten film that never found its audience. But then something strange happened. The film received 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Suddenly, people were curious. Television stations started showing it during award season. More people watched it. More people talked about it. And then it was released on VHS, home video cassette, and something extraordinary began. People rented it. They watched it alone. They cried. They called their friends and told them to watch it. They watched it again and again. It spread through families and friend groups like a quiet wave that just kept building. By the time it reached its 5th year of being available on home video, it had become the #1 most rented film in the United States. Then came the Internet. When the website IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, began collecting user ratings in the late 1990s, Shawshank began climbing, slowly at first, then faster. It eventually reached the #1 spot on their list of the greatest films of all time, rated higher than The Godfather, higher than Citizen Kane, higher than any other movie ever made, entirely by the votes of ordinary people around the world. It failed once. Then it became forever. What died in theaters was reborn in living rooms everywhere. Number 10. The Warden's Bible. Had a real secret cut into it. In the film, the prison warden, a cold, hypocritical man who quotes scripture while running a corrupt system, keeps a Bible on his desk. Near the end of the story, he reaches for it and finds that Andy has left him a message. The inside of the Bible has been carved out, hollowed to hold a small rock hammer, just like the kind Andy used to escape. The warden's most prized symbol of righteousness hid the very tool of the prisoner's freedom. The props team created multiple versions of this Bible for filming. They needed one that looked completely normal on the outside, but had been precisely hollowed on the inside to hold the hammer snugly. Carving had to look as if Andy had done it himself. Careful, patient, invisible to anyone who didn't open the cover. Creating the hollow required precise measurements. The hammer had to fit perfectly without bulging the cover or making the book feel unusually heavy when held. Multiple test versions were built and discarded before the right one was achieved. The symbolism, of course, was deliberate and powerful. Warden's Bible, his shield, his weapon, his performance of goodness, literally contained the evidence of his prisoner's genius and courage. What he used to control people was hiding the very thing he could not control. It is one of the most perfectly constructed images in the film. The prop itself told the entire story. What looked like faith was hollowing out from the inside. Number 9. Morgan Freeman's audition was unlike anyone else's. When Frank Darabont held auditions for the role of Red, many actors came in and read the lines. They prepared. They brought their interpretations. They performed. But when Morgan Freeman sat down and read, something different happened. Freeman didn't perform the lines so much as live inside them. He spoke slowly and carefully, as if Red's words were true memories from a real life he had actually lived. There was no apparent effort, no big emotional display, just presence. Deep, quiet, unshakable presence. The audition room later said the atmosphere changed when Freeman read. The air in the room got still. Everyone stopped fidgeting. No one checked their notes. They just listened. Darabont said afterward that he knew within the first few lines. Not because Freeman was showing off, it was exactly the opposite. Freeman was disappearing into the character so completely that you forgot you were watching an audition. You forgot it was a room with cameras and scripts. You just felt like you were listening to an old man tell you the truth about his life. That quality, that absolute stillness, is what makes Red so unforgettable on screen. Freeman never seems to be acting. He seems to be remembering. The camera loves memory the way it loves nothing else. It wasn't a performance. It was recognition. Freeman knew Red because Red was already somewhere inside him, waiting to be found. Number 8. The letter Andy leaves for Red took 3 different versions. Near the end of the film, after Andy has escaped, he leaves a message for Red. A letter buried under a rock in a field, near a stone wall in Buxton. The letter tells Red where to find money and gives him a reason to hope. It is a gentle, beautiful piece of writing that feels like a hand reaching across distance and time. But the first version of that letter, as written in Darabont's original screenplay, was longer and more explicit. It gave more specific directions and described Andy's feelings in greater detail. Darabont and his team reviewed it during post-production. Something felt off. Too many words. Too much explanation. The of the moment was being talked to death. The second version was shorter, but still felt slightly too clever, as if it was trying to be poetic in a way that called attention to itself. Red, reading it aloud, felt self-conscious. The third version, the one in the finished film, was pared down to almost nothing. Just warmth. Just a simple invitation. Just enough direction to lead a man toward hope without overwhelming. Morgan Freeman read it in a voice so quiet it barely rises above a whisper. The less the letter said, the more it meant. The shorter it became, the heavier it got. In the editing room, someone realized that silence and space around words can carry more emotion than the words themselves. What was cut out made what remained perfect. Number 7. The ending scene on the beach was not in Stephen King's original story. The very last image of the Shawshank Redemption, Ed walking across a white sandy beach in Zihuatanejo, Mexico, seeing Andy in the distance, the 2 men reuniting by the ocean, is one of the most emotionally satisfying endings in movie history. Audiences have cried at that image for 30 years. It feels complete in a way that's almost impossible to describe. But Stephen King never wrote that scene. His original story ends differently, with Red on a bus heading south, feeling frightened but hopeful, the words "I hope" echoing in his mind. We never see the beach. We never see Andy again. We are left with hope, but not confirmation. Darabont made the decision to show the reunion. He wanted to give audiences the thing they had been silently longing for throughout the entire film. Not just hope, but the fulfillment of hope. Not just the idea of freedom, but the sight of it. 2 men, an open sky, an endless sea. The scene was filmed in Zihuatanejo, a real coastal town in Mexico that had been mentioned throughout the film as Andy's dream destination. Filming there took several days and involved local crew and an enormous amount of logistical planning. The beach itself was carefully chosen for its light. The way the gold of late afternoon fell across the water created a warmth that felt like another world entirely. Number 5. Bob Gunton, prepared for the warden by reading about real corrupt officials. The warden in Shawshank, Samuel Norton, is one of cinema's most perfectly constructed villains. He is not loud or violent in an obvious way. He is cold, precise. He hides cruelty behind religion and procedure. He quotes the Bible and runs a corruption scheme. He is genuinely frightening in the way that only truly believable people can be frightening. Actor Bob Gunton, who played Norton, prepared for the role not by studying theatrical villains from other films, but by researching real people. He read accounts of actual corrupt prison officials, political figures who preached morality while practicing something entirely different, and historical examples of institutional cruelty carried out by men who genuinely believed in their own righteousness. What Gunton found disturbed him deeply. He realized that the most dangerous kind of wrongdoing is the kind done by people who are completely convinced. Norton doesn't think of himself as evil. He thinks of himself as necessary, as doing what needs to be done, as above judgment. That self-certainty is the most chilling thing about him. Gunton brought that certainty to every scene. His voice never wavers. His eyes never show doubt. Even when his crimes are being exposed, he reaches not for remorse, but for a weapon. He would rather destroy himself than admit he was wrong. That portrait of institutional evil made audiences deeply uncomfortable, not because it seemed fantastical, but because it seemed completely familiar. Most people have met a version of Samuel Norton somewhere in their lives. Smaller perhaps, less extreme, but recognizable. Gunton made the monster human, and that was the most frightening choice of all. Number 4. The film's score was recorded with unusual instruments. The music of The Shawshank Redemption was composed by Thomas Newman, who went on to become one of Hollywood's most respected film composers. Newman's approach to scoring Shawshank was unusual. Instead of writing a large, sweeping orchestral score full of brass and strings, the kind of music typically used for emotional drama, Newman chose something quieter and more peculiar. Unconventional instruments and unusual recording technique. Prepared piano, a piano where objects are placed on the strings to alter the sound, appears throughout the score, giving familiar notes and unexpected texture. Percussion instruments create rhythms that feel ancient and slightly mysterious. The music often sounds less like a film score and more like something someone is humming quietly to themselves in an empty room. Newman later explained that he wanted the music to feel like memory, the way a person remembers something important, not with a grand announcement, but with a quiet, private feeling that sneaks up on you without warning. The score should not tell you how to feel. It should simply be there, like a presence in the corner of a room, reminding you that something significant is happening. The result is one of the most distinctive and emotionally precise scores in film history. It never overwhelms a scene. It never competes with the actors. It simply accompanies the story the way a good friend accompanies you, present, quiet, steady, and true. The music of Shawshank sounds like hope, feels, not dramatic, not loud, just persistent. Small tools, old strings, something entirely new. Number 3. Tim Robbins prepared by reading every letter King had ever published to play Andy Dufresne, a man of extraordinary patience and quiet inner fire. Tim Robbins did not simply memorize his lines and show up on set. He undertook a significant process of preparation that went far beyond the screenplay. He read Stephen King's original story multiple times, studied the character's background as a banker, learning about finance and the specific way that educated, intelligent men carry themselves in professional environments. Most unusually, he read every letter and interview he could find in which Stephen King talked about the character of Andy. He was trying to understand not just what Andy did, but who Andy was at a molecular level, the kind of man who could spend 20 years in a prison and never allow that prison to live inside him. Robbins also did physical preparation. He maintained a very particular posture throughout filming, slightly upright, never slumping, always carrying himself with a kind of internal dignity even when surrounded by degrading circumstances. Directors of the film noted that Robbins seemed to carry an invisible wall around himself on set, just as Andy does in the story. He was approachable and kind to everyone, but there was something unreachable about him during filming, something private. That quality of a man who is present but untouchable, who is suffering but unbroken, is exactly what makes Andy so extraordinary to watch. He is never melodramatic. He never begs for the audience's sympathy. He simply endures, quietly and completely, and the audience is pulled toward him by the gravity of his dignity. That wasn't luck. That was an actor studying a character until the character became a kind of second skin. Number 2. The film changed how we think about hope in cinema. This fact is not about a prop or a filming location or a casting story. This fact is about something bigger, something harder to measure. The Shawshank Redemption changed what audiences expected from movies about suffering. Before Shawshank, films about prisons and injustice tended to follow certain patterns. They were brutal. They showed degradation in detail. They ended with either escape or death, or both. The message was usually about the cruelty of systems and the damage done to human beings by those systems. Important messages, true messages, but often heavy in a way that left audiences feeling crushed. Shawshank did something different. It looked directly at cruelty and injustice and suffering, and then chose, with full awareness of what it was doing, to say that hope was stronger. Not foolish hope, not naive hope, earned hope, the kind of hope that costs something to maintain, the kind that you have to protect every single day against the weight of everything trying to extinguish it. The film's thesis, stated most clearly in Red's final narration, is that hope is a dangerous thing only if you let others convince you it is. A man who maintains hope in a hopeless place is not crazy. He is the only sane one in the room. This message arrived at exactly the right cultural moment. 1994 was a complicated, sometimes dark year in American life. Audiences were tired. They were ready to be reminded that the human spirit is harder to kill than any system, any wall, any locked door. Shawshank gave them that reminder, and they never let it go. What looked like a simple prison story was actually a blueprint for how to be human. Number 1. The film became the world's most beloved movie because of ordinary people. The number 1 fact about the Shawshank Redemption is the most remarkable of all. Not because it involves a famous actor or a technical achievement or a production secret, but because it is about us, about the audience, about what happens when ordinary people decide that a story deserves to live. No studio marketing campaign made Shawshank famous. No awards victory launched it into immortality. It lost every Oscar it was nominated for, including Best Picture, which went to Forrest Gump that year. No influential critic crowned it the greatest film of all time. None of that happened. What happened was simpler and stranger and more beautiful than any of those things. People watched it alone, at home, on VHS, in quiet rooms. They felt something move inside them. They called their mothers, their brothers, their friends. They said, "You have to watch this." And those people watched it, and they called someone else. For years and then decades, the film passed from hand to hand like a letter that never gets old. Generation after generation discovered it and felt what all those people before them had felt. That mysterious combination of sadness and warmth, injustice and grace, loneliness and connection. When the internet allowed people to vote on what they loved, they voted for Shawshank. Not because of critical consensus, not because of box office numbers, but because it had lived in their hearts, sometimes for years, waiting for someone to ask, "What film matters most to you?" No studio chose this. No algorithm designed it. Ordinary people, watching alone, decided together that this story of hope inside a hopeless place was the most important thing they had ever seen on a screen. One man said it to another. That other man said it to someone else. And so on. Forever. That is not marketing. That is love. Bonus fact: the scene that was never filmed. And what it would have shown. There is a scene that Frank Darabont wrote, storyboarded, and prepared, and then decided at the very last moment not to film. It was a scene that would have appeared just before Andy's escape. In this version, Andy sits in his cell on his final night inside Shawshank. He does not sleep. He sits at the small desk where he has written letters for the prison library for years, and he writes one final letter, not to anyone specific, but to himself. A private accounting of everything he had been and everything he hoped to become. Darabont later described this letter in interviews as one of the most moving pieces of writing in his screenplay. It detailed Andy's interior life in a way the film never quite shows directly. The private grief of a wrongly imprisoned man, the particular texture of hope maintained in darkness for 20 years, the exact feeling of standing at the edge of the rest of your life and choosing not to be afraid. The reason Darabont chose not to film it was ultimately about trust. He realized that the audience had spent the entire film inside Andy's journey, feeling everything alongside him. To stop and explain it, to make Andy speak his inner world aloud, would have been a kind of disrespect. It would have assumed the audience needed to be told what they could already feel. The decision to remove a scene that spelled out the emotion and trust the silence to carry it instead is one of the most sophisticated artistic choices in the film. The unfilmed scene exists now only in Darabont's original script, available to those who seek it out. Some fans have read it and wept. Some have said it would have made the film even more powerful. But Darabont understood something profound, that the space between what is shown and what is felt is where the audience lives, where they bring themselves to a story, where a film stops being a film and becomes a private experience. The scene was never filmed, and the absence of it made everything else more true. Some stories are too important to explain. They are meant to be carried, in the bones, in the chest, in the quiet part of the night, when you remember something that changed you and can't quite say why. What was left out, let the rest breathe. Sometimes the greatest scenes are the ones nobody ever sees. The Shawshank Redemption is not really a movie about prison. It is a movie about what happens inside a person when the outside world tries to take everything from them. It is about the wall you build around your own spirit to protect the part of yourself that no one can touch. It is about friendship that grows slowly and holds forever. It is about the patience it takes to believe in something beautiful when everything around you says beauty is impossible. 30 years after it quietly disappeared from theaters, and 30 years after it came back through the hands and hearts of ordinary people, it is still there, still the same, still waiting for the next person who needs to hear that hope is not foolish, that walls can be crossed, that somewhere there is a blue ocean and a white beach, and a friend walking toward you. These 20 facts, and the one hidden bonus story, remind us that the magic we see on screen is built from real human effort, real courage, real stubbornness, and real love. From a dollar deal between a writer and a dreamer, from a man who said no to $1 million because he believed in a story, from an actor who crawled through something awful to stand in the rain with his arms out, from editors who knew when to cut, from a composer who chose silence over noise. Every great film is built by people who cared more than they were required to. That care is what you feel when you watch. That care is what made a flopped movie into forever. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.